Good morning, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to this chapter of the Birds on Niagara celebration. I'm Greg Stevens with the Niagara River Greenway, and we're here today with a number of our important programming partners to give you some highlights of conservation and habitat restoration work that's going on the Niagara uh, with the Niagara River Greenway. We're very fortunate to be in the midst of a 50-year project funded by New York State and the Power Authority to restore the habitat along the Niagara River. And the Greenway is organizing the infrastructure improvements along the river, but we rely heavily on partners like the Western New York Land Conservancy and Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers to provide the expertise for the development of these new conservation areas. In this wonderful photograph, you can see the entire Niagara. We call it a river. Technically, it's a strait connecting the two Great Lakes. It's a 37-mile-long distance connecting Lake Erie at the bottom to Lake Ontario at the top. And in this photograph, you can see some brighter green areas, which are on Grand Island and in the lower Niagara, which are our most important habitat restoration areas. You also see a whole lot of white and gray, which are the cities of Buffalo and Niagara Falls and all of the industrial development around them. And these are obviously much lower habitat areas, but we're working across the entire area to try and boost the natural shoreline area from currently we have only 20% of this total area in natural shoreline, 80% in built environment. And we're hoping to shift that balance as we move forward. So a riparian habitat is the ecological zone where the land meets the water. Obviously very critical to waterfowl, for fish breeding. And what we're focusing on is trying to create a functional ecosystem at the edge of the water so that our parks and green spaces are doing more than just giving people a place to sit or walk, that they're actually functioning as stormwater management areas, that they are planted with natural plants and pollinators. We work on that in partnership with Jay Burney and many others in the Pollinator Conservation Alliance. And every project that we do along the Niagara River, we try to make sure that it has a high content of natural habitat and wildlife restoration. Our Greenway Ecological Standing Committee funds restoration projects in areas like you see here, the wetland in Buckhorn at the northern tip of Grand Island. And you'll hear more from the Western New York Land Conservancy and Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper about some of the work they're doing in these critical areas. So in working on these projects, we are trying to naturalize more of the shoreline. We have somewhere between 60 and 80% of our shoreline is man-made concrete or steel, which was necessary for the marine industry, the Erie Canal days. But as we move forward, we're trying to soften more of this to be more conducive to wildlife habitat and more accessible for people to access the river. The main point moving forward is we're hoping to encourage more of our businesses and private landowners to add more natural habitat to their properties all along the river. So that's just an introduction from the Greenway. I'm very happy now to introduce Claudia Rosen, who works with us both as a program manager at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and she also is the NREC representative to the Greenway Commission, who comment on the ecological integrity of all the projects that come before us. So welcome, Claudia.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Claudia Rosen, and I'm really excited to join you today to talk about the Living Shorelines program. So this is a program, one of the many conservation efforts here in the Niagara River Greenway that is working to protect and restore bird habitat. And my name's Claudia. I'm from Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. If you haven't heard of us before, we're a local nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect and restore water and surrounding ecosystems here in the Niagara River watershed. So we do that in several different ways by protecting clean water, restoring the health of ecosystems, connecting people to their water, and inspiring economic growth and community engagement. And we're really lucky to work here in the Niagara River Greenway. As Greg mentioned, the Greenway is a world-class corridor of places, parks, and landscapes. The Niagara River is also a globally significant important bird area. So that means birds depend upon the river and its shoreline habitat in such numbers that it's of global significance. So it's really important for us all to care about this awesome place that we get to live. The Niagara River watershed is also connected to the Great Lakes Basin, which supports 20% of the world's fresh surface water. So we know that habitat work really benefits birds, but it also benefits humans too, in clean water, preventing pollution, preventing erosion. So I wanted to mention that today we're about protecting birds, but also protecting humans and water. So the Living Shorelines program came about after noticing some degraded shoreline conditions in the Niagara River Greenway. This is a map showing where some of the shorelines have been hardened. We were finding that up to 80% in certain areas of the river were a hardened shoreline, so degraded from their natural state. And what does it really mean to be hardened? It basically means that the shoreline has been altered either with concrete, metal, large rocks, and this really impacts the habitat value of the shoreline. It can lead to property loss, and it can also lead to pollutants entering the waterway through running off. Another thing that we noticed is that shorelines were degraded by erosion as well. So these pictures show grass right up to the edge of the shoreline, and then erosive forces kind of causing the degradation of that shoreline. So that's kind of why the Living Shorelines program came about. This program aims to restore shoreline areas to their natural state. We really want to support sustainable, resilient, and higher functioning ecosystems. And we want to create those functional, healthy shorelines that enhance habitat, improve water quality, and also enhance recreational access for humans too. So this picture shows really the main feature of what a living shoreline is, and that's a gradual transition from land to water. So we know that each different habitat type within that gradual transition supports wildlife and supports a different type of ecosystem right there along the shoreline. Another thing that this photo says is that shorelines are actually a ribbon of life. So it's estimated that 90% of all lake and river life is born, raised, or finds its food along the shorelines. So they're really an important place for wildlife, especially birds. So this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the projects in the Niagara River Greenway. You might have seen, visited, or heard of these projects. Tiff Nature Preserve, Little Beaver Island on Grand Island, Ellicott Creek Park in Tonawanda. Today, in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on Hyde Park Lake. So this is a project that was implemented in 2017. on Hyde Park Lake, which is connected to Gill Creek, a tributary to the Niagara River. You'll notice in that first picture before the restoration, the shoreline was experiencing some erosion, and this was having a negative impact on the water quality of the lake, and it was not providing good wildlife habitat for birds. These are some pictures of after the restoration. So certain features of this project include the installation of a cattail marsh, a woodland glade, a meadow, and also the installation of aquatic habitat in the nearshore areas. So we installed certain features like a shallow water habitat. We planted over 1,300 plants, native plants, both in the water and along the shoreline. We used recycled logs and boulders to provide structure and habitat complexity along the shoreline as well. So these are just some of the creatures that kind of come about after this restoration. So by using native plants, we're also attracting pollinators to the site. We're improving water quality, again, by decreasing the amount of runoff and pollutants. So we're benefiting things like the aquatic macroinvertebrates, the little bugs that live in the lake and then become our awesome adult dragonflies and damselflies that you see here. And as birders, we know that with some of those habitat features, with some of the insects and the native plants come birds. So this picture, if you squint really hard, you'll be able to see two green herons that are checking out some of the woody debris that was installed along the shoreline. So again, that's providing good perching habitat. It's benefiting the fish that live near the shoreline. So birds that then eat the fish are also benefiting by that habitat improvement. These are just some of the other birds that we are lucky to see here at the Hyde Park Lake Living Shoreline Project. We've got some tree swallows that were checking out the nest box there, an American goldfinch in the meadow that was really excited, hopefully, to see some of the native plants, the seeds, and the insects that come along with those native plants, and then a female red-winged blackbird. Again, just a couple more birds that were checking out this habitat site and that you might be able to see if you ever visit Hyde Park Lake. It's really great to see some of the wildlife sort of come back after these habitat improvements along the waterway. So with that, I wanted to end my presentation with the fact that you too can support birds in the Niagara River Greenway. You can do that several different ways. If you're a birder, you might already be contributing to community science projects like eBird, but you can also implement living shoreline principles in your own yard. You can use natural elements and native plants to benefit the wildlife and birds specifically in your backyard. And Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper does have some resources on our website if you're interested in learning more about how you can do that. So with that, I'll say thank you. I hope you learned a little bit about our Living Shorelines program and you're excited to get outside and look at birds this weekend. So I will hand it on over to Dave Spearing from New York State Parks.
Thank you, Claudia. I am Dave Spearing from the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, or State Parks for short. I'm happy to be here to talk about bird conservation in New York State Parks. And before I move on to my next slide, I am going to give credit to the the Cornell Ornithological Lab. All the pictures I'm using were taken from there. It's a great resource. I put the link on here, all about birds, easy to remember. If you're into bird watching, you'll want to spend some time on that website. So I'm going to talk about bird conservation areas in New York State. They span the state. You can see there's 27 of them across the state, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them in the Niagara River. Buckhorn Island State Park first, and then Joseph Davis State Park. So here we have an aerial view of Buckhorn Island State Park. It's one of our very natural state parks. Not a lot of infrastructure in here. Great for wildlife, great for getting out and seeing wildlife. I'm going to talk about 2 projects. First, Burnship Creek, which Greg mentioned at the introduction, and as well as Grass Island. So here's an aerial view of Burnship Creek, a before image of the project, and an after on the left, and an after image on the right. I do want to mention Ducks Unlimited as well. They were a project partner on this, getting some of this work done. So what you see on the left is some patches of open water, which are artificial in some sense. They were dredged in the past, and a lot of cattail. wildlife likes a mix of cattail and open water. So this project, which you can see on the right, created channels and potholes through that wetland. This creates nesting spots, hiding spots, foraging spots, micro habitat and topography for a variety of fish and wildlife, and birds love it. You might ask yourself, oh, pardon me, here's an expansive view of the project looking from a different direction. And you can see the project in the foreground, but then further on, you see the wetland that continues past the project area, creating the largest remnant wetland in the Niagara River. And you might ask, how do you achieve such a project out in the middle of a wetland? Well, here's a picture from the project. We use the same kind of a construction activity and equipment that you would for road building and that. But here they actually have to place wooden timber mats out there so they can move this equipment in the marsh. Once the contractor has all this in place, he can switch that implement on his excavator to a bucket, and he literally digs out the wetland to create the channels and the potholes. You notice the time of year this is being done. You don't see leaves on the trees. We do this work in the winter so that we're not interfering with nesting birds. Most of our migratory birds have left for the season, and we really do all we can to protect the wildlife in the wetland while we're doing this work, because this is quite a disturbance. And speaking of wildlife, here are some of the great birds that occur in the wetland at Buckhorn Island State Park. The sedge wren, northern harrier, least bittern, and pied-billed grebe, those are species of real high conservation significance and value. And all those occur here in the wetland at Buckhorn. The wood duck is a much more common bird, but certainly a great sight for everyone to see. I'll mention another online resource, eBird. Claudia referenced this in her presentation, and Buckhorn Island State Park is an excellent spot. It not only has one, but two birding hotspots in eBird and 218 species around the wetland. It's one of the really great areas to see a wide variety of wetland. So conservation actions that Parks undertakes include these wetland and channel pothole projects, invasive species control. We do native plantings, nesting structures like the wood duck boxes you saw in the previous slide. And we also protect existing wetlands, which leads me to this Grass Island project. This project has not been completed. That's why I only have this rendering of it. But this project is located just offshore of Buckhorn Island and Grand Island. And it's a riverine wetland of huge ecological significance for wildlife. We'll construct these offshore berms to protect the existing vegetation, the vegetation we plant from wave action, boat wake, ice scour, because this area, many of those birds like least bitterns, pied-billed grebes, they would use this area for nesting. And the purple martin you see on this slide, they come and roost here, that's spend the night, by the thousands and even tens of thousands some years. So we're losing Grass Island to some of those forces I mentioned, like wave and wind action, but this project will really secure and protect that wetland. Now we're gonna move down to the lower Niagara River. So we went down the river over the falls, and we're here at Joe Davis State Park, located between Youngstown and Lewiston. And here it's another birding hotspot, but it's different kind of birds we're looking for. These aren't as many as the wetland birds here. Here, there's early successional habitats that are supporting unique and birds of high conservation value. Birds that occur in grasslands and shrublands. And if you're not familiar with succession, succession is an important ecological process, and it's really just the gradual replacement of one community with another. This slide's a little grainy here, but I use this scan from a textbook because I really liked it. It shows the progression of communities from a grassland, shrubland, into a forest community, and then the different types of wildlife that will support. So here in Western New York, left untouched, most of our land will succeed into a forest community, and we won't have grasslands and shrublands. So we're working to maintain those types of communities for the wildlife they support. And you might ask, how do you create an early successional habitat? Well, again, we use big, heavy orange and yellow equipment. This is a hydro axe, which can cut through shrubs just like you would mow the lawn. So this is at work at Joe Davis State Park, and it creates habitats like this. So you see some trees, but you see very open areas. You can see the mowed down shrubs, the stumps that are left, and this will support those types of wildlife species like the ones we see here. On the left, the eastern meadowlark, bobolink, those are grassland birds. Willow flycatchers, common yellowthroat, woodcock, they like things on the bit more shrubby side. And these habitats require this type of disturbance to maintain them. So after 10, 15, 20 years, when there's too many trees growing in there, we'll actually probably come in and we'll remow the shrubs and the trees and to maintain these grassland and shrubland habitats. And with that, I would really thank you for listening, and I would encourage you to get out to your state parks and enjoy the wildlife there. But remember, those state parks just aren't a playground. They're home to many species of birds and wildlife. With that, I'd like to introduce one of the best birders that I know in the area, Jean Rose Burney with the Western New York Land Conservancy. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Dave, for that accolade, and thanks for the introduction. So I'm Jean Rose Burney, the Deputy Director at the Western New York Land Conservancy, and I'm going to talk about some of the projects that we've been doing along the Niagara River to protect and restore bird habitat there. Just an overview, the Land Conservancy is a land trust, regional land trust in Western New York. We've been around since 1991, and we protect land, we protect forests, meadows, farmland too. We have a lot of publicly accessible nature preserves. And over the last maybe 10 years, we've been focusing a lot of our work along the Niagara River, along with trying to create the Niagara River Greenway like a lot of us here are doing. And I'm just going to go over a few of the different projects that I think, especially important for birds on the Niagara River. And the first that I want to show is our Stella Niagara Preserve up in Lewiston. This is a 29-acre property that we purchased from the Sisters of St. Francis in 2015. This is a property that has a 1/4 mile of undeveloped shoreline, so soft shoreline. It was the largest undeveloped privately owned property left on the Niagara River. So, state parks and county parks are bigger, but of the private property that was left that wasn't developed, this was the largest. So this is a really important place to protect. It has this natural landing right on the river. There's no gorge, there's no steep embankment. So for thousands of years, millennia, this was a landing spot for Native Americans. This is in the War of 1812. This is where the British landed when they captured Fort Niagara. This is a place where the sisters had docks and people have gone in and out of the water forever. But this natural shoreline is also really good bird habitat. So you get a variety of waterfowl in the river, the Stella Niagara, all winter, gulls, waterfowl, ducks. Along the shoreline, you get some really cool birds in the riparian forests, black-crowned night herons, osprey, bald eagle. And then you get a diversity of habitats on this small property, meadows, wet forests, mature forests. And so you get this diversity of birds there too. One of the things that we did after we bought the property is we started restoring habitat in the meadow, trying to control invasive species. So improving habitat for things like common yellowthroats, song sparrows, even bluebirds. One of the things that makes this property cool, in addition to the river and this diversity of habitats, is that in the winter, there's enough open water, running water, even on the property itself. You get this kind of interesting diversity of birds that overwinter here, songbirds that you don't find in a lot of other places. Overwintering in Western New York, things like catbirds and mockingbirds and bluebirds and a lot of robins. And so this is one of our highlight properties, publicly accessible. There's trails, a lot of cultural history, and the bird watching here is really cool. So let's move on to another project that another property that we acquired. This one is a 150-acre property on Grand Island. It's called the Marjorie Gallagly Nature Sanctuary. And this is basically a large wooded wetland, an oak forest, an oak hickory forest, a lot of vernal pools, portions of Little 6 Mile Creek, portions of Big 6 Mile Creek, both tributaries of the Niagara River. And there's now trails there, you know, these we call these bog bridges. It's so wet in the spring that you really need to be elevated because otherwise it's just mud or standing water. But that habitat is really kind of unique and rare. And we get some really neat deep woods nesting birds here that you don't get in a lot of other places along the Niagara River because most of the big forests have been cut. It's mostly urbanized, but you still get these big forests on Grand Island. And so this ovenbird, this is a migratory warbler that, you know, typically you find in really big, large patches of forest, you know, outside of the city in the southern tier, but they nest here, you know, 2 or 3 individuals or pairs nest at the Gallagher Sanctuary. And I don't know if the pileated woodpecker nests here, but we have heard it here. And it has been seen on Grand Island in similar places, similar large forests like Buckhorn or Beaver Island in the last 10 years. And I think it's really cool to think that this pileated is probably nesting somewhere on Grand Island, if not Gallagher, near Gallagher. Because if you go back 200 years, Grand Island was entirely a big white oak forest. And almost all of it was cut down, you know, in the 1800s. And so basically clear cut the island. And these pileated woodpeckers need these large patches of forest to nest. And more than just forest, they need old forest, mature forest, dead trees, big trees, cavities. You know, that's what they need. And so what's happened over the last 100 years in Grand Island is a lot of these forests have grown back. Gallagher is one of those places. The forest has grown back. You're starting to get old, mature forest, 100-year-old trees. And the pileated has come back. And so seeing a pileated woodpecker on Grand Island in the last 5 or 10 years, that's the first time in 200 years that there's been pileated woodpeckers on Grand Island. They've come back. And so that's pretty cool. And we have definitely heard them at the Gallagher Forest. We're doing a few other acquisitions, purchases of land on Grand Island, grasslands that have nesting bobolinks and northern harriers hunting there, other big forests, mature forests where you get scarlet tanagers in the summer. And we have this program we call it the Grand Island Land Protection Program that's funded with Greenway funds, Greenway Ecological Standing Committee funds, where we're working with landowners who want to protect their land, and we're going to try to buy the properties from them, use conservation easements, which is a tool, it's a legal agreement with the landowner that protects the land, but the property stays with the landowner. And in most of these places, create new public access, make these publicly accessible nature preserves where people can see and experience the birds and the other wildlife that make Grand Island so unique. And the last project I want to talk about is a little bit different than the others. It's a restoration project, a habitat restoration project in the Niagara Gorge. So at Whirlpool State Park and Devil's Hole State Park, we're working with state parks to do habitat restoration at these places. It's a really unique habitat, incredible diversity of plants, old growth trees, you know, 500-600-year-old white cedars in the gorge walls, orchids, rare and protected plants that, you know, wildflowers that you can't see anywhere else. But it's been heavily degraded by invasive species over the last 100 years. You know, the gorge is very industrialized, railroads, mills. And so what we see now, you know, is a lot of forest, but you get a lot of Norway maple and ailanthus and buckthorn and things that really aren't good for wildlife habitat. Even if they look green and beautiful, it's really sort of a dead zone for a lot of wildlife. So we've been trying to control those invasive plant species and add native species that should be there to improve the wildlife habitat, especially for birds that need to eat. You know, most songbirds feed their young exclusively on the caterpillars of moths and butterflies, and most moths and butterflies need native trees, oaks, you know, milkweed you've heard of with the monarch butterfly. They need these native plants, this native vegetation to feed. So if all you have is a Norway maple forest, you lose all your moths and butterflies, you lose all your birds, and we're trying to reverse that. We're trying to bring it all back. And this is more than 100 acres, working with state parks, using a lot of Greenway funding and state funding and other private funding to restore these forests to what they were, and you know, hopefully set them up to be sustainable and free of invasive species going forward. So those are our big projects in the Niagara River. And so thank you. And the next speaker I would like to introduce is Tim DePriest from the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Greetings, Birds on Niagara Festival participants. I hope everyone's enjoying the program so far. My name is Tim DePriest. I'm an ecologist with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm going to share some information with you today regarding some recent projects to improve nesting habitat for some of our native bird species on the Niagara River. These are projects that were completed as part of the New York Power Authority's 2007 relicensing commitment for the Niagara Power Project. And these projects I figured would be good to highlight for this festival because they have significantly improved nesting habitat for the species I'll be talking about, which obviously contributes to the population of birds on the Niagara River for us to enjoy through festivals such as Birds on Niagara. So I'm going to get started here and talk about, first of all, a project to improve nesting for the common tern, which is New York State threatened species. The Buffalo Harbor has been home to nesting terns for about the past 3 decades or so. We at the DEC started out actively managing these areas and through some small scale efforts. But with the relicensing opportunities through the New York Power Authority, they agreed to help us really improve the nesting on 3 different breakwalls, 4 different locations in the Buffalo Harbor. You can see this is an aerial photo that shows the breakwall areas in the harbor that have received improvements. This is the old North Breakwater, Donnelly's Breakwater, with nesting on the end down here. Then we have the short breakwater with a site at this end and a site at this end, and the south breakwater down here in these zoomed in photos. And this is basically a simple process of improving the nesting habitat through the addition of pea gravel to the tops of the breakwalls. This is a photo that shows the process to construct these areas back about 10 years ago, once again. And it consists of building a retaining wall out of steel and then backfilling it all in with tons and tons of pea gravel. And that gets you to your basic nesting habitat requirement. But then there's additionally an annual effort that goes into maintaining these sites and making sure that they're managed for optimal nesting. So it includes annual installation of perimeter fencing to keep the young chicks from wandering off outside the nesting area. And then we add driftwood and these fabricated shelters made out of plywood that offer some cover for the young chicks and fledglings as they go through their life history out here on the breakwalls. Here's a picture of what this site at Donnelly's breakwall looks like during peak nesting, which is usually right around mid to late May. You can see that in this case, we've got abundant nesting this year, and all those tern shelters are deployed, the nesting shelters. You can see some of the chicks right here that are kind of just huddled on the ground, and some nesting, some nest areas here with some clutches of eggs that are just put into a shallow depression, a very simple nest in the pea gravel. And through this effort, this colony has become one of the largest nesting colonies on the Great Lakes. This little bit of data from 2012, shortly after the site was completed and the nesting really got started, you can see that before we built these sites out, we had between 1,400 and 1,600 pairs in an average year. And then after the structures, the nesting locations were improved. You can see we shot up to, in this year, 2,100 nests roughly, which is a pretty significant increase in the nesting success, the fledgling success here. And this led it to be one of the largest colonies in the Great Lakes. Now, unfortunately, we did lose one site on Donnelly's last year, or I should say in October 2019, due to severe storm activity. That site's been permanently lost, but we're hoping that the other site in the Niagara River recently constructed by Audubon to build a nesting island will provide the opportunity for those birds to relocate to that nesting area. Okay, so this has been very successful. New York Power Authority did win several awards for this project, and it continues to be a very successful habitat improvement project for us here in the Niagara. Okay, another species that's benefited from some improved nesting sites is the osprey. This is a species that's returned in the last few decades to the Niagara River with improved conditions for foraging and reproductive success. However, nesting locations are fairly limited, as this species would naturally probably seek out large dead trees for nesting in along the river. And with land use changes in the last century or so, there are very few large dead trees. So this project uses a standard technique of just using utility type poles with a steel nesting platform constructed on the top, like you see here. It's a fairly straightforward effort, and through relicensing, we've added 5 of these platforms to the Niagara Greenway, and each one of these red stars kind of shows you where those locations are, all the way to the north, up at the Adams Slip, near the power plant intakes along the river. There was one installed at Buckhorn Island State Park at the north end of Grand Island, 2 at Beaver Island State Park at the south end of Grand Island, one at Little Beaver Island and the other one East River Marsh. And then finally, all the way at the south end of the Niagara Greenway at Tift Reserve. Now, over the years, there's been various levels of success with these different nesting platforms. Originally, Buckhorn Island was the first successful nest, but in recent years, that nest has been abandoned for unknown reasons. However, there is a relatively new nest at Little Beaver Island, and the nest at Tift has been occupied, I believe, ever since it's been installed. And those 2 sites are, in recent years, the most successful. And those are actually probably the best ones to view as well, especially at Tift. They usually have a spotting scope set up on the deck over Lake Kirsty, across over to the nest. And at Beaver Island, you're also able to view the nest pretty readily from the park roadway across the lagoon. So those are 2 great spots for osprey watching if you'd like to venture out this summer and take a look at those. And finally, I'm going to wrap up here with a note on some improvements to the Motor Island area. This is a DEC-owned property. It's a wildlife management area that was acquired specifically to protect the colonial waterbird nesting habitat on this island for 3 species of herons. Those right there are great blue herons with, looks like, 2 adults and a couple of fledglings on the nest from a couple of years ago. This is Motor Island right here, and you can see that a lot of the work was done to improve the shoreline, which was artificially hardened many years ago. And this was a destination for, it was a private club for motorboat owners, and so it was basically turned into a resort, if you will. And the shorelines were completely vertical or hardened, making it difficult for young birds to negotiate the shoreline. And so this project, we regraded the shoreline to create some fringe wetlands and some foraging habitat for the young birds, as well as planting numerous trees to help create the next generation of trees that will support nesting here on this island. Currently, the nests are located mostly in this patch of trees right here and somewhat at the downstream end. Some of these trees are suffering from old age and some other issues that are causing their demise. So we really want to get the next generation of trees planted out there to benefit. Basically, there's 3 species of herons that are utilizing the island as for their nesting. On any given year, we'll have on average 150 pair of great blue heron, 75 pair of great egrets, which is only one of 2, I believe, nesting sites for great egrets in New York State. and then typically around 50 pair of black crowned night heron. So it's quite a active colony to witness in the summertime. I think the best way to view this site is probably from a boat, from either a canoe or kayak. Is probably your best bet. You can paddle around the island and take a look at all the activity out there. Highly recommend it. So today, thank you. I'll just end with this parting shot of our most recent nesting bird to the Niagara River, and that's the American bald eagle, which now has been nesting on Strawberry Island. So it's an exciting time to be birding in the Niagara, and I encourage you all to take advantage of this resource and be glad to know that we're making great strides to improve their reproductive success so that we'll have lots of birding to do well into the future. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank you for attending, and I want to give a special shout out, thank you to all the guest speakers today. We couldn't achieve our goals as Niagara River Greenway Commission unless we had the support of the expertise of all these partners. And I just wanted to touch base on some of the things that Niagara River Greenway is doing, their own initiatives, aside from all the great things our partners are doing. We are a small group, but we do try to be the collaborator, a convener, and trying to pull in all of our partners in with certain community events and schools and youth stewardship programs. So we do involve community groups in doing things like cleanups along the Niagara River and some of the tributaries. We do plugging events where that's basically a walking or running where you're getting your exercise and picking up litter. We have established a great partnership with the Rotary of Western New York that helps maintain the shoreline all along the Niagara River Greenway. And they also are very involved in our youth stewardship program, where we go into schools and we involve all these partners that you saw today, help us do on-site educational experiences outside by the waterways, where the kids are learning to come up with projects. They go and do assessments of the tributaries of the Greenway or the Niagara River itself, and they identify what could be improved on it, and they come up with a plan on how to restore that area. It's a long-term program that can be passed on from class to class, and it's a great way to keep our places nice and biodiverse. The things we focus on with these programs is invasive species removal and native plantings. And something that we have in the works that we're just trying to get going now are friends groups within the communities, and we're focusing on the Niagara Gorge and Gill Creek, along working with Western New York Land Conservancy, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers, and all the other groups that we saw today. If you are interested to learn more about this or want to help out and volunteer, I'd like you to contact me, Michelle Lockett, a community engagement manager, at 256-0534. And thanks for participating.